Guys, welcome back to another voiceover lecture. This content was a bit more extensive than I anticipated, so I ended up breaking it up into two sections, A and B. To briefly recap, we went over the basics, what I call Econ 101, including common terms and how they apply to the various decisions that we make every day, not just decisions about healthcare. We then moved into healthcare as a market and how we measure health and approach healthcare insurance. So now we will move forward in analyzing the healthcare services market. In this presentation, we will have a greater knowledge about the various insurance plans. Most common and popular are our employer-sponsored plans, which often fall under an MCO, Managed Care Organization. Within the reimbursement model, we must address the supplier, with whom they are receiving payment for the health care provided. This includes you. You are both a supplier and a healthcare professional and consumer. This slide is a repeat from the first lecture to review the centrality of what we are talking about, what economics is, what health economics is, and recall health itself is subjective. It's very difficult to measure because it cannot be quantified, wrapped up into a nice bow. What we can do is measure health outcomes. What do I mean by health is price inelastic? Health is fairly resistant to price changes, unlike other commodities, because life is so valued, which it should be. So we are willing to pay just about any price. It is a reasonable expectation that as Americans, we have clean air, clean water, safe roads, safe foods, you name it, all those things that promote and protect health. Now, what we do with these things is quite individualized. Nevertheless, we have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. You can't be happy if you lack the liberty and right to live and to be healthy. So health is individualized. Recall what makes healthcare different. We typically do not plan on having a health event. It is unpredictable and randomly occurring, and usually undesired, right? I mean, there are those exceptions. The relationship between buyer, patient or consumer, and the supplier, physician, nurse, is not on equal ground. The provider knows more. That remains to be true despite Wikipedia and Google offering a false sense of knowledge and know-how. And the services we, quote, pay, end quote, for are not necessarily observed. Meaning we do not go into Walmart to buy health and walk out showing that we did so. But we can walk into Walmart to buy a Diet Coke, beer, a new computer. If we can't buy health, how does health insurance work? The book goes into many terms, which we will see as we move forward. Terms like moral hazard and risk pools. Health insurance, regardless of the type, serves as the mediator between you and physician. They exist as the third party. The insurance company negotiates with the group what services will be covered and how much they will pay for the service. Although insurance gives us a sense of security, we do assume some costs in the form of copayments, annual deductibles, and procedures that are required to pay outright with or without prior authorization. Many argue that insurance companies have too much power and say over our healthcare. In many respects, that is a valid claim because they serve as the go-between, the third-party payer. But from an economic perspective, let me ask, do they not have that right? If they are the ones assuming the cost, sure. Not only do we typically avoid the full burden of the healthcare costs, but our behaviors tend to lean toward using more because we don't have to pay for it. We don't feel the pain. no pun intended. So lecture number 3 wrapped up introducing the types of health insurance. Public, which are our federal plans, such as Medicare and Medicaid, the VA, and private plans, which are typically employer-sponsored, such as Blue Cross Blue Shield. We are now going to look at MCOs, Managed Care Organizations. Managed care organizations are an umbrella term. The most common types include the HMO, Health Maintenance Organization, and the PPO, the Preferred Provider Organization. MCOs embrace implementing risk-sharing strategies to control spending. Therefore, they reimburse via prospective payment or capitation, and really emerged as an alternative to the traditional indemnity or fee-for-service plan to mediate medical care costs. Quality studies are ambiguous. Can't really tell which style is better, MCO versus fee-for-service, but look at the selection bias before making judgments. MCOs are approximately 10 to 20% cheaper, while prospective payment has created more price competition. If healthy, you tend to be in an MCO because your needs are low. Conversely, if sick, you tend to be in a fee-for-service where your health needs are high. This is not exact, but just an economic perspective. Prospective recall means payment occurs prior to care, essentially like prepaid or fixed-rate healthcare. Or I like how it is referred to as an all-you-can-eat buffet. You got lots of options at a low cost while limited on the availability of high-cost cares. For example, seeing an orthopedic surgeon for a stubbed toe. That would not only be a waste of resources, but a waste of money. Screening and preventative care also lessens the likelihood of this occurring. Factors that affect price elasticities in healthcare as a generalization include A, relative costs. Today we cannot overlook inflation. It truly affects us as a trickle-down phenomenon. But costs here also refer to your own sacrifice. B, affected also by need. So for example, do we need EMS versus a routine office visit? And C, the availability of substitutes. Is there a same-day procedure center via a versus a hospitalization for the same operation? Be familiar with the 4 classifications of HMOs. I will not go into great detail on the exam. I care primarily that you understand what they are, how they are structured, and an example of each, particularly ones we see in our region of the country. HMOs were like the mothership of MCOs. They started it all, the big dogs as I call them, are Kaiser Permanente and Group Health. PPOs are a type of MCO, but differ a bit from an HMO in that patients may see outside network or contracted providers without a referral. Such oversight is referred to as the gatekeeper since a referral is required by the primary care physician to see a specialist. This is to help keep low benefit, high cost treatments down. Remember, the goal is appropriateness and efficiency. In the case of a PPO, naturally, providers are used within the network by incentivizing via low out-of-pocket costs. Otherwise, physicians out of network place a greater responsibility on the patient, such as a higher copay. Supply-side approaches to controlling costs through selective contracting, risk sharing, and utilization review. While on the demand side, we see the patient deductibles and coinsurance. What do these do? Patient costs help minimize moral hazard. When we see the case manager RNs in the hospital setting, this is exactly what they are there to do. What is nice about the PPO model is that it eliminates the gatekeeper and the patient consumer has more say in the decision making process. This concept drives the movement for consumer centered or consumer directed health plans. Behind the idea is that individuals know best what they need, not directives from the insurance company or the government. This is where competition prevails as well. Competition embraces opportunity, more options, and ultimately medical advancements. Technological advancements boom. Areas like medical devices and new drugs, since it creates a profit motive. One's motive is another's benefit. Good old self interest, one of the 10 key economic concepts. Let's test our knowledge. Managed care is, take a moment to determine the correct answer. The answer is C. Risk sharing is an important mechanism used in managed care to control spending. MCOs are expanding the use of risk sharing arrangements where patient and physician or mid level bear some of the consequences of excessive spending. Okay, so we control costs, which must occur. How does this work for the physicians? We talked about human capital, which we all are. When we make the sacrifice to go to college and invest in our education, we want to see an adequate ROI, return on investment. In other words, is it worth it? If I come out with $100,000 in school loan debt, will my income potential be good? Will my degree continue to make me marketable? And if so, how many years before it pays off? At what point may I actually start to see the fruits of my labor? Make a profit, improve my income while minimizing my debt. Recall, you technically cannot call an employee an asset because assets are something you own. Humans are not owned. The physician services market has seen quite a bit of changes through the years. This is an anticipated shortage of PCPs, primary care physicians. In fact, just within the past couple of years, post-COVID 2020 to current, we have seen a reduction in medical school enrollment rates despite increasing seats and creating more medical programs. This is not unlike nursing. For instance, RN to BSN programs are a dime a dozen. You have several choices to advance your education, which has become easier as a lot of programs have streamlined their curricula from the entry-level ADN programs. Academia all around is removing barriers to achieving a degree. I mean, it wasn't that long ago that you went from a BSN to an MSN program. Now, most nursing programs have cut that master's landing by creating BSN to PhD or BSN to DNP programs. Specifically for PCPs, we see a competitive nature that meets the supply need by increasing the number of ARNP programs, Advanced Practice Nurse Practitioner, most notably the FNP track for Family Nurse Practitioner. Although MDs receive a small portion of total medical spending, they are the drivers of its provisions. They determine how the money is spent, right? I mean, even for nurses, very little can be done without a doctor's say. Without an order, a patient cannot be admitted or discharged from the hospital, get an MRI, labs drawn, or be seen by a physical therapist. You name it. Demand for inputs follows the law of supply and demand, just as other goods and services do. A few key differences lie in human behavior. Because we don't directly pay for the physician's time, the input demanded depends on the final product, which is a derived demand. So again, because this differs based on the individual patient, once he or she decides what level of health they desire, the level of input demand is established. Non-economic factors that affect demand include individual preferences and the quality of care. Here we want to optimize in terms of cost effectiveness, yet still maximize health outcomes, the output. I will not test you on math equations, but you see why a basic understanding of statistics is required to study economics. We cannot overlook the mid-level providers. NPs fall under this term, so do PAs, physician assistants, or in the hospital setting, they are often referred to as an SA, surgical assistant. And there are CRNAs, certified registered nurse anesthetists. The term provider is avoided because its use emerged from the insurance companies for structure purposes, not intended to refer to the physician role. Now, we branch off into several different types of specialists, some initially MD educated, while others have doctoral degrees. A DNP, for example, has a practice doctorate as a nurse practitioner, but is not an MD. Similarly, a PharmD, a DPT, and other disciplines, such as a JD, a lawyer, have a practice doctorate. We'll see PhDs referred to as doctors because it is a terminal degree and one has earned that. Sometimes you'll see a practice doctorate with a PhD, like MD PhD or JD PhD. I, your course faculty, am a PhD RN. We must address the market for different specialists. For example, DOs, Doctor of Osteopathic Medicine, dentists, and ophthalmologists. All of us carry the burden of liability to practice. Obviously, the more specialized and therefore greater responsibility, the higher the cost, whether it be the cost of malpractice insurance and or legal fees driven by court cases. Tort reform is an integral part of healthcare reform, which is reducing civil lawsuits and the amount of money awarded. Litigations cost millions, and in some cases, the consequence is bankruptcy. Let's look at a few compelling statistics based on medical specialties. The riskiest practices appear to be pediatrics. Makes sense. Followed by pathology and OBGYN have pretty payment loss. The least risky is dermatology. Imagine the liability the specialized pediatric doctor carries, say pediatric cardiology, oncology, and then put a surgeon into the mix, pediatric cardiothoracic surgeon or pediatric neurosurgeon. The latter spend most of their adult lives in school mastering their trade to be a high-level performer only to get out and be told by the government or other political forces where their skills are needed. That is, geographical variations based on characteristics such as population characteristics and how much money they should make or spend on their patients for that matter. Limiting physician fees deemed as usual, customary, and reasonable UCR levels. It's not surprising they tend to go overboard with ordering diagnostic tests, imaging, and other procedures, which typically tend to be the high-cost ones like a full-body PET scan, in an attempt to cover all their bases to avoid litigation. This defensive medicine is not that uncommon. What are some ways economists see physicians? Behavior being moderated. One way is to address areas where physicians have a great deal of market power. That's where geographic variations come into play. Another is through their natural monopoly power. They know they are needed, but can differentiate their practice from the next guy by being different. What can set them apart? This is where being a high performer, reputable physician dominates. Remember, a non-economic factor affecting demand is quality of care. Doctors, as a generalization, possess an entrepreneurial spirit. Recommendations by both patients and colleagues give them that edge above all others. Some of the same issues facing nursing. Wages tend to be set low, but hospitals compete by offering higher wages and other perks to attract nurses, the good ones. This wraps up the first section of Lecture 3. To be continued, like the logo from the Back to the Future movie franchise. See you in Part B.